This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Sound Porter Mastering, OWC, Atom Audio, API Audio, JZ Microphones, Spectra 1964, and Isotope. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now through the JZ Pop Filter on the JZ BB29 microphone, through the Spectra 1964 STX600 mic pre-complementer, and Isotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC Mercury Extreme Pro 6G SSD. So get ready to rock.
I'll like to take either a Sanzant rack or a Sanzant pedal alongside the clean DI, and usually those two in the mix is a good starting point. And then by the time I actually go to the mixing stage, I might also kind of duplicate the DI track and put like a more aggressive distortion on that and blend that in subtly. I'm totally happy with that. Like, I could care less if I have a bass amp to mic up. I'm totally happy just using those direct tools.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Whether you're in the studio or working remotely, the Envoy Pro FX from OWC lets you record from anywhere with confidence, pushing USB technology bandwidth to the max of 2,800 megabytes per second over Thunderbolt. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for the road, the OWC Envoy Pro FX is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Find the new Envoy Pro FX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. JZ Mics brings you the ultimate futuristic pop filter for your studio, built from solid metal parts that won't break and a flexible gooseneck for easy placement. The JZ Pop Filter uses a unique waveguide design that prevents plosives from getting through to the mic while allowing important high frequencies for clarity. Plus, it looks super cool and you're hearing my voice on it right now. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off this amazing pop filter from jzmic.com.
When I master a song, I'm immersed and committed to a sonic fidelity from start to beyond finished. Hi, I'm Brian Murphy of Sound Porter Mastering. My goal in every master is to help you prepare so that you're not compromising your timeline, budget, or your mix. My iterative process helps build a relationship with you so that you don't have to ever second guess your mix. Let's pull back the curtains on mastering because there's no secrets here. Send me your mix and I'll give you free feedback or a free master demo. Just hit me up at soundporter.com.
Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Jordan Valeriot, an independent producer, mixer, and an audio educator from Ontario, Canada, specializing in hardcore music. Recently, Jordan joined us to talk about how to go from charging $100 to $1,000 a song as a full-stack producer. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go check out that bonus episode. Jordan has worked with many bands like Silverstein, Antimacy, The Dead and Divine, Prophets for the Counterparts, Nick Johnson, Forevermore, Great Lakes, Mandroid, EchoStar, and Skynet, to name just a few. And today, we're going to focus more on mixing and what lessons Jordan has learned about mixing heavy music himself and through his teaching over at Hardcore Music Studio, where he helps engineers and producers like yourself learn how to make better records. I'll see what we can learn about some of the most common struggles that you might be having with getting your rock music to sound powerful, tight, and in your face when you record and mix. So please welcome back Jordan Valeriot to Recording Studio Rockstars. Jordan, are you ready to rock, dude?
I'm ready to rock, man. I got made myself a nice cappuccino here before we hopped on, and I'm ready to go.
Oh, sweet, man. Well, so of course, as everybody knows, listening to this podcast enough, this episode will come out long after we do the interview, but it's still, chilly and cozy and snowy this time of year, and we've just sort of finished with the holidays and everything. I hope you had a good holiday.
I did. It was awesome. I took a couple of weeks pretty much totally off. I like to totally disconnect. Didn't even really step foot in my office for 2 weeks. So very, very refreshing and gives me a lot of energy to just get back at it this year.
Nice. And for you and I, since it's cold now, we get the pleasure of thinking forward to when this comes out in the spring and picturing it already being like warm and flowery outside.
That will be nice. I'm definitely not a huge winter guy. So, although this year I'm kind of getting into it. I'm trying to make a hockey rink in my backyard, just a small one. But
Oh, that's awesome. My sister did that actually. She bought a thing and I helped her assemble it, and it was like a bunch of little plastic panels and then
yeah,
some ropes that go across the middle and you fill it up with water.
yeah. It's the weather's not quite cooperating, but it'll be good. Hopefully we can get it set up and good for the kids to skate on and stuff.
Yeah. So now, if I recall correctly from one of our earliest interviews, you are, you're in Canada, you're sort of in a rural setting, and then maybe you have like a big barn or something like that where your studio is or was at one point.
That was my setup like years ago. That was probably from about 2006 till 2015. I think I moved out of that spot.
Okay.
And since then, I've just had a mixing rig at home.
Well, I mean, you know how old I am. I'm living in the past, dude. Okay, groovy. Well, let's talk a little bit about your space now. Tell us a little bit about what is your studio environment like? What are the tools that you like to surround yourself with to make records and to make a great mix?
It's gotten so simple, Lidge, like over the years. Right now, I'm just mixing. I just have an Apogee Duet, so just a 2-in, 2-out interface because I'm completely in the box. I don't use any outboard gear at all. So I've just got that. I've got my NS10s, and I mix in Pro Tools, and like I said, all in the box. So that's basically my my mixing rig. With an iMac, a little control surface, an Avid control surface. I like to actually touch faders when I'm mixing. And as far as the space, it's a fairly good sized room here at my house. It's just one of the bedrooms that I've taken over and tried to make look a little bit cool and feel cool, for music, and put some acoustic treatment up, just some standard broadband absorbers. And it works, man. I've done a couple of YouTube videos on this recently, but when I moved out of that old studio that I had, where I had a lot more treatment, I had more gear, I had like a few pairs of monitors, I went through a lot of different stuff there, and it was a lot fancier looking. But when I took my mixing rig home, I was super scared to mix my first project because I was coming out of a better space, or so I thought. Mm-hmm. Coming into a less ideal room, smaller, less treatment, a less ideal shape, all this stuff, right? It was more noisy. I could hear street noise outside. It was harder to hear fine details in the mix. But I mixed a record. It was for Nick Johnston, one of his records. And it turned out to be one of the better mixes I've ever done, I think. So wow. It totally changed my mindset. And I think, there are reasons why I think I actually get better mixes here at home than I used to at a quote better studio. But I don't know if you want to go down that road.
Sure. No, we're happy to learn about all this stuff. So, I love for this episode to be focused on, what it means to be mixing in a home studio. What are the benefits? Where are the unexpected surprises? You said you're mixing with a pair of NS10s. I used them for years and years, and I recently switched after I blew up another pair.
Right.
But what have you discovered about things like, like a common question might be somebody saying like, oh, do I need to have a subwoofer with an NS10? What's your experience with that? And where do you like to put your speakers? And even are they like vertical or horizontal to make you feel really comfortable while you're working?
Yeah, so I have my NS10s horizontal, even though the model that I have, apparently, judging by the writing on it, the direction of the label, I should have them vertical, I guess. But every studio I've ever been to has them horizontal like this. So that's how I set them up when I first got them. And I've just rolled with that. I'm used to it.
And that puts the tweeters on the outside?
That's right, yeah. Yeah, and it's pretty standard setup. I don't use a sub. I have heard NS10s with a sub at other studios, and I could see it being useful for tracking just to kind of feel the music a bit more. Mm-hmm. But for me, it's this weird thing where not having a sub, this is really counterintuitive, but the fact that I can't really hear much below 100 hertz when I mix on these, I think actually works to my advantage. I actually really like that. Mm-hmm. And so I wouldn't want to add a sub now. I did go through a time where I was like, oh man, maybe I should get a sub. And I was researching and trying to figure out what I should get. And then I heard it somewhere in another studio. I was like, it's kind of weird. Like this defeats the purpose for me. So yeah, I just keep it with these, man. And when it comes to the low end, I have a pair of Audio-Technica headphones that I throw on, and then I can hear the sub frequencies with those. And I honestly spend maybe 4 or 5 minutes messing with that in a mix, and that's it.
Okay, cool. So let's dig into the headphone issue just a little bit. If somebody hears that and they think, oh, maybe I do have Audio-Technica headphones, or maybe I don't, maybe I got a different pair. What does it mean to hear the subs in the headphones? Do you think that we need to be, and I don't mean to put you on the spot to be like, the ultimate headphone expert or anything, but do you think that we need to be concerned about whether we have, quote, the right pair of headphones? Or when you say you hear the subs in the headphones, do you think that's a little bit more of a universal, like just about any great, good quality pair of headphones is going to give you enough of the low end to make an accurate assessment?
Yeah, I would think that any headphone. I mean, it's funny when I tell that to my students or people who are watching my YouTube videos or whatever, they ask, "Oh, what kind of headphones are you using?" Because I'll mention that I reference low end headphones, and I'll tell them it's these ATM50s. Let me look again to see if I'm even right about that. I think that's right, but there's nothing special about them. I think they've become pretty popular, but I bought these things like 15 years ago. They were just one of the first studio headphones I bought, and I've just kept them since then. So I think with the headphones and with really any monitor, to me, the most important thing is just that you know how stuff sounds in them. So the more hours you log, the more different records you listen to on those speakers or on those headphones, the more useful they're going to be to you.
Yeah. So what's funny to me is, when I interviewed Andrew Sheps years ago, he talked about mixing on a laptop and mixing in a pair of headphones as well. Although I think he does a lot of his mix there. And when I asked him what headphones he uses, he says they were the Sony 7506s. And I was like, really? I was like, those were the ones that we had in the first studio I worked at back in the mid 90s. And I think they'd been around for a while since then. And hearing you even describe these headphones, it's a little bit of a reminder that some of these tools that we use, other than maybe these NS10s, might just also be like, what was the thing at the time when I got a pair of headphones and started to learn them? There's a lot to be said for, pick a tool that's pretty good and just learn that tool.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that, man. I think it's all about just really understanding and knowing your gear, knowing what it sounds like, knowing what other pro records sound like on that setup. That's like 95% of the battle with, translation at least, and getting stuff to sound good outside of the studio too.
Now, do you have a process that sort of works for you as far as learning your headphones? I mean, maybe you just had them for so long, you don't have to do that anymore, but do you intentionally sit down in the studio with those headphones, or just take the headphones with you and just go listen to records at different times?
Not so much with headphones. I've done that a lot more with monitors. So, when I first got my NS10s, for example, when I was in the studio, like setting up mics or tearing down from a session or like backing up sessions or whatever, basically any downtime in the studio, I would just play reference tracks, like albums I liked, mixes I liked through the NS10s in my room. And I would just be in there listening to how they sounded. So it just kind of got burned into my brain. If I was mixing entirely on headphones, I would do the same thing. I would probably just take these same headphones with me everywhere, listen to music, just casually anytime, just try to log hours on these headphones. But because I'm not actually kind of mixing full songs in them, I'm literally just checking low end. So like when I throw them on, I'm literally just tunnel vision on trying to hear those sub frequencies.
Right.
And I'll reference my mix, and just listening to the sub, I'll reference that against some other mixes that I like, just to hear, like, do I have enough of that rumble? Do I have enough of that low end sub punch? And I'm dead serious when I say I'm like less than 5 minutes over an entire, like, let's say 6-hour mix. I'm probably doing that for like less than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It's very tunnel vision on those frequencies. So yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So I recently just did an interview with Brian Lucy, mastering engineer, and he talked about something similar where he said, you kind of have these references that almost like demarcate your fence line. It's like if you've got a reference and in those headphones that a particular song has what you consider your maximum amount of low end, then you know that you're sort of within those boundaries when you reference yours.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I've been doing for years, and it works. And actually, I'm kind of working behind the scenes. I'm trying to launch my own plugins, and one of the plugins I'm working on right now and testing right now is literally exactly that. So it's supposed to hopefully just take it out of our brains and just objectively measure your mix against, whole stack of professional references and say, are you in the ballpark for low end and high end? And it just will tell you like you need more, you've got too much, or you're in the ballpark. So I'm trying to iron that out. We're close, but I think that's going to be a really useful tool just to. Obviously, still we need to use our ears, but just to quickly, you don't have to go out to the car and check it. You could just pull up this plugin and it'll say like, yeah, your mix compared to all these other mixes, you're in the ballpark or you're not.
I like that, man. Can I request a feature? Can you put in there something that like it'll give me a high five?
Yeah. Trying to make it fun. I'm trying to figure out how to like display it.
And I get to put my own name into the plugin. So like each person who buys it gets to put their name and they'll be like, high five, Lidge. You nailed it.
That's a good idea.
You may already know that iZotope creates the very best smart plugins for mixing and mastering. But did you know that now you can get them all through iZotope's new affordable subscription bundles? Get Music Production Suite Pro for only $24.99 per month or Producers Club for only $19.99 per month. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscriptions or Spire Studio. The Spectra 1964 BBDI Passive Direct Box is perfect for recording deep bass that will make your mixes sound huge. Plug that into a C610 comp limiter, and as founder Bill Cheney points out, it'll move your pant leg. But what if you want to record direct keyboards? Spectra 1964 now offers the Stereo BBDI 2 with custom wound high-Z transformers for big headroom, virtually flat response, and a 15 dB input pad at spectra1964.com. Okay, cool. What about volume? So when you're listening to stuff and you're getting familiar with different records, how loud so let me put this in context. You're making heavy records a lot. You're making hardcore records. You're making stuff that, is the definition of rock, which I think of as wanting to be loud and powerful. But is there anything we need to know about how loud we're actually listening to on our speakers or on our headphones when we're sort of learning and making these judgment calls?
Yeah, I wish I could remember the last time I measured the SPL that I was listening at. I think it was like 60, the high 60s, like 67, 68 or something, or 65 maybe. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think that's very gentle in a way, right?
Yeah, I don't
cranked
mix
up.
too loud. Yeah, not cranked. Especially on the NS10s. I don't think they sound that good when they're loud. So I just I keep them at a comfortable volume. I could talk to you like this beside me fairly easily at the volume I'm mixing at. The headphones, again, I try not to spend too much time on them because I find my ears get really fatigued really quickly.
Yeah.
So I'll put them on and I'll have them fairly loud because, again, I want to kind of hear and feel that sub, but it's only a minute or so at a time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I try to mix. I just have that sweet spot, and I think it's around 65 dB. I don't have a meter where I'm consciously measuring it. I know it feels right over the years, and I think it's kind of a delicate balance because I know everyone says to mix you need to mix as quiet as possible. I've heard that before, and I've tried that, but I find that if I'm mixing too quiet, my balance gets a little wacky where my vocal is way too loud in the mix because I'll have the whole mix. I'm hearing everything really quiet, right? But I want to hear every word of that vocal. So I'll end up pushing the vocal up way too loud. And then, I'll turn it up or I'll go check in the car or something. And the vocal will just be screaming and just have to come back and fix it. But, I definitely try to jump around between volumes a couple times throughout the mix. But generally, around that 65 dB level, I think is where I stick.
Yeah, it's interesting. I find that low volume can really help me just do some balances between levels. But sometimes if I try and continue on with the mix and I'm at a really low level, I'll way overexcite certain things, and then I turn it up and I'm like, whoa,
Yep.
It's way too much of stuff. But that's cool. So, I feel like the takeaway from that is a volume that you could have a conversation with is a pretty good place to be while you're working. Loud is a good place to be when you want to check the low end and the
Hmm.
power, but don't stay there very long unless you're done working for the day and you're just
Yeah.
having a party.
Yeah, totally.
And then, real quiet is maybe a place to go to just, again, like the loud, just check something, but maybe don't hang out there for too long.
Yeah, that sums it up pretty well.
Yeah, okay, dig it. Expensive studio for mixing. Is that something we need to think about? You've already kind of given us the answer, but maybe you could elaborate on that further, and maybe you could talk about the one potentially, costly item that is also, maybe worth spending a little bit of money on, which is the controller.
Yeah, you mean the like my fader controller?
Yeah, yeah. Tell us about that too.
Yeah. Okay, let me go back to the first question. So it was about, do you need an expensive mix room?
Yeah. Do we need an expensive studio? Do we need expensive gear?
Yeah.
What do we need to know about that?
Expensive? I don't think so. I mean, I'll take it in two halves. Like when it comes to tracking, obviously the better room is better. I mean, I would way rather track in a really nice sounding room that's well treated, or at least has a really nice sounding ambience. I like to have good mics, but good mics don't have to be expensive. I mean, in my studio where I used to track, man, I bought and sold a lot of gear. I had a lot of gear acquisition syndrome
Right.
at different times. I remember once I bought like $1,000 or $1,200 GFL mic because people were saying it sounded really great on ride cymbal. I was just like, I remember a couple of weeks later, I was like, what was I thinking? Like, I don't need a $1,200 mic to record a ride cymbal. But
You're like, I need less ride cymbal.
yeah,
Well, it depends on the
exactly.
music genre, right?
Yeah. So, I ended up with, again, in tracking rock, heavy bands. I had mostly dynamic mics, which are usually less expensive. Sorry. So, 57s, 8kg D112s for the kick. Some really cheap tom mics that I liked after trying a whole bunch of different options. These Sennheiser E604s, they're super cheap and they sound awesome on toms. SM7B. And then I just had like a couple decent condensers, for room mics or the occasional vocal. And small diaphragm condensers for overheads and different acoustic instruments. So I had a pretty stripped down setup. And preamp wise and outboard wise, I like having, if I was having a project studio to record bands again, I'm mostly just mixing now, but I would have, and what I recommend is at least one channel or maybe 1 to 4 channels of like a really good high quality preamp, like, an API or an SSL or like some type of Neve clone or something like that. I want to have at least a couple of those. And for the most part, we're only recording like 1 or 2 mics at a time, aside from drums. Mm-hmm. So you don't need a whole rack of like API or SSL or Neve preamps. You just need 1 or 2, or maybe a rack that has 4 in them. I used to like my API 3124.
Now, is it worth pointing out that you're not necessarily talking about a setup to track a large band all simultaneously and live together, or am I missing something there too?
Yeah, definitely to clarify that. Yeah, so I would never track a live band, and that's pretty unusual for the genre that I'm working on, rock. Mm-hmm. I mean, most genres really, except for maybe in the country world, they're still tracking full live bands. I don't know, but yeah, it's just drums, then we're tracking bass separately, guitar separately, everything separately. So
yeah, well, you might track, and again, just to put it in context, you might record everybody playing together, but you're really only focused on the drums now, knowing you're going to replace the guitar, scratch, and bass or anything like that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I might. There's definitely been times where I'd have, a guitar player playing along just DI with an amp sim in the drummer's headphones or something.
Right.
Typically, like that was more earlier on, and then as the years went on, we'd be doing more pre-pro. So we do kind of some rough demos or get the guitar player to play his track to the click or whatever. And we would just have those tracks for the drummer to play to. So it wasn't all happening in real time, but yeah, totally.
But when pre-pro means that you can already really well define what the parts are going to be. So you don't need those other instruments as references so much.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So, aside from that, like then just fill out other channels you need in terms of preamps. I used to have like an old Focusrite Octo pre. I had these old Sci-Tech preamps that were pretty good and cheap. So, as long as you have a few good channels, maybe one outboard compressor, I think Distressor is my favorite. I think you're good to go, like tracking wise. And you don't have to have a perfect space. The space that I made a ton of records in was very small. It was maybe like 12 by 15 ish,
Hmm.
pretty low ceilings. And I just found over the years the best solution was just to deaden it as much as I could
Right.
because the ambience was just not good. Like, for the most part, you're probably not going to get a good room tone out of a small room that's
Yeah.
not built as a studio. So just try to deaden it as much as possible. And that's what I did. And I think that'll work. And when it comes to mixing, man, I've definitely changed. Like from back then, like 10, 15 years ago, I would have said you need to have like, as most accurate room possible and make sure everything's set up really well. But again, these days, since moving my mixing rig home and getting better mixes in a worse environment, I don't feel that way anymore. I
That's
actually feel
cool.
there's a lot of advantages to working in an imperfect space.
Right. I'm in the process of spending a lot of money redoing my control room, so I'm going to listen intently. I can't rewind the clock now, but I've also experienced similar things. I'm always struck by the times where I, under design the technicality of my studio or my mix setup, and then get results where later I go back and I'm like, man, that just sounds killer. It's like sometimes it's, when you think about what is recording, mixing, editing, all that stuff, it's like, a lot of us have the same knobs we're going to reach for, the same EQs, the same stuff. It's just a question of, turning it to the right point so that the result ends up sounding great. And you can do that as long as you know how to get there, you're good to go.
Yeah. No matter what you're working on.
Right.
Yeah. There's been times where I remember like through the years as I was learning, like I would add all this new gear or new room treatment or learn these fancy new techniques or whatever it is, new plugins. And then I'd go back to something I did like a year or two ago, way more kind of bare bones. I'd be like, that sounds better. Why does that sound better? And it's kind of this, I think it's a journey every engineer and mixer kind of goes through is like, when you first start out, you're all just passion and energy. You have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah.
But sometimes things come together in a magical way. Then you learn all the details and then you way overthink and overcomplicate everything. And then hopefully you come out the other side where you really understand the tools and you have a good technical knowledge, but you're able to just bring back kind of just the feel and not overthink things and just use your ears and just react, and make it musical again.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely true. Now, one of the tools that you started to talk about, but we didn't get any deeper into, is the Avid mix controller with the fader pack.
Yes, right. So I use the Avid Artist Mix now. I've used like the Command 8 and PreSonus fader port through the years. Doesn't really matter what it is. But when it comes to automation, and I like to do a lot of automation in my mixes, I have to have a fader. Like I just cannot stand drawing it in with a mouse or like trying to ride a fader with a mouse. It's just, it's so painful and it takes so long. So yeah, I have to have at the very least, just the single fader, like the PreSonus fader port. I mix with that for a little bit because this artist mix is a little temperamental, and sometimes there was a period where something with the OS or whatever, I couldn't get it to connect. So I went back to the single fader port. But now I've got the artist mix back. It's got 8 faders, which is it's a little faster and easier to use. But yeah, I've got to have it. I automate like a ton of tracks in my mix, so it really helps me kind of just have mix with feel, and not with my eyes. So yeah, I got to have something.
What are the moments where you're physically using it? So for example, are you breaking out EQs and compressor plugins onto this as well? Or is it more all about just having a mute button and a pan and a fader to quickly do balances? And then is it like, do you use it a lot at the beginning when you're balancing a mix and then a lot at the end when you're tweaking the last little adjustment?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So right at the beginning, as I'm getting the rough balance, that's where I'm mostly using the faders, the mutes, the pans. And then kind of the middle part of my mix, I'm mostly with my mouse and I'm, using plugins, EQs, compressors and stuff. Mm-hmm. And then towards the end, I'll get to automation. And that's, where I'm just using the faders a ton. And I do a lot of, I came up with this little term that I think describes it well called micro automation, mm-hmm. where I'm going through and it's just like, whether it's on the overheads or the snare or of course the vocal or bass or guitars. And I'm just, making maybe a dB or two at a time and just kind of pushing up little things like at the start of a bar, pushing up the kick drum downbeat, so that sounds a little harder. Or the crashes, pushing those up a couple dB on the big hits and then bringing them down so they're not eating up all the high ends throughout a course or something like that.
Right.
And just literally riding it through like the entire song, the kick, the snare, I do that. The overheads for the cymbals, I go through, make sure all the tom hits, like all the tom fills are audible. I go through bass and guitar and kind of not as much on those, but just kind of push up, different sections. Again, like start of a course, I like to get my rhythm guitars, like just give them a little push, like a half a dB makes a big difference on kind of stereo rhythm guitars, and just give it a little push going into a chorus or into a louder part.
So when you say
guitar,
going into, you mean like just that first bar or something and they're settled back to where they were?
Yeah, exactly. Like first downbeat of a chorus or something, just push them up a little bit and then gradually bring it back down. I like to do that with lead guitars or other elements like synths that kind of come in throughout a part.
Mm-hmm.
I like to kind of think of it as you kind of push it up just for the start. So it's almost like the part or the instrument's kind of like popping their head up or kind of waving and be like, "Hey, I'm here." And then, the listener notices it, but then you kind of tuck it back in nicely into the mix so that it's not, fighting with everything, but at the same time, it keeps the mix kind of dynamic, and the listener's like, "Oh, there's a cool part over there." And then, just keeping things exciting.
Now, when I think about doing that with a mouse, I can't help picturing the screen, and I'm looking at, how many dBs did I just move that fader? And then
Exactly.
and then the science part of my brain kicks in, is like, is that too much?
Yeah.
Or I'm watching the line draw on the screen. Do you find that when you're using the fader controller that you sort of stop doing that and you're just doing it by feel and just trust, a little more feel and trust?
Yeah, that's totally it, man. And like you said, it keeps your brain out of the scientific mode a little more. I find even with vocals, when I'm automating the vocal, I'll actually make sure that I switch to the mix window in Pro Tools so that I don't see the line on the screen. So that's kind of another trick to help keep me from, because otherwise with vocals especially, or really any instrument, is like you kind of react to the waveform if you're watching it, right? Like you'll see that, these couple words, the waveforms are really big on the screen. And so you'll naturally move the fader down when it gets there. But
absolutely. Yeah. It's so funny. There's so many things that visually are so great for making records, and then at the same time, they completely screw up making records.
Yes. I think it's, like, obviously I'm a huge fan of in-the-box mixing. I think the technology is awesome where it's gotten to. But yeah, I think that's the one downside, is all the potential visual pitfalls and distractions.
Listen, don't look. Atom Audio can provide all your monitor needs, whether you are setting up a first-time home studio for recording music or podcasts, or a world-class studio for professional mixing and mastering. Their unique accelerated ribbon tweeter design is famous for creating smooth, detailed imaging that let your speakers disappear into your music, allowing you to focus on the mix. Learn how to set up your studio monitors and control room for great sound, plus lots of other cool studio tips at atom-audio.com/education. If you're ready to upgrade your studio to the famous sound of API's large format consoles, then you're ready for The Box, a small format console featuring the same analog circuitry and original 2520 op-amp design that has made API famous for 50 years. Record through 8 world-class mic pre-channels, mix through 24 smooth-as-glass faders, and upgrade your home studio to legendary status. API now offers a virtual console experience, allowing you to get a personalized online demo of The Box at apiaudio.com. Cool. So the Avid Artist Mix. Now, any other tips about things like, do you have to be smart about how you set Pro Tools, for example, so that when you let go of a fader, it doesn't instantly jump back, but like eases back to, where you left off, or back into write mode, or back into read mode rather?
Yeah, I use it in latch mode. So basically how it works is if I grab a fader if I touch the fader and if I move it, when I let it go, it just continues writing the automation at that new level. So it doesn't go back when I let it go. And that's typically the way I've worked. It seems to be the fastest for me.
Okay. And then when does it stop writing? As soon as you hit stop in Pro Tools, or?
Yeah.
So then you would sort of like boost the guitars at the beginning of the chorus, bring them back, let go of the fader. Sounds good to you. And now you continue listening until you hit the end of the chorus and then hit stop in Pro Tools. And that's when it cuts back to the verse level or something like that.
Yeah. I'll just manually bring it back down. So like I'll push up the guitars, a little bit, and then I'll just kind of manually just like pull the fader back down till the line's kind of right where it was before.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll just let it go. And then I'll either keep going and keep listening, like you said, or I'll just hit stop right then and it'll be written in there.
Okay, cool. All right. Let me jump to some other topics. So, we're talking about mixing, but you also described, some of the places you might want to have some good tools for the recording aspect of it. How important is the recording and production as far as getting a great mix? I mean, I think a lot of people have the impression that mixing is where the secret sauce is, and that's where you really make stuff sound great. Do you have any comments about that? Anything we need to be reminded of?
Yes. So the secret sauce is definitely in the tracking and the production. And I was the same way. I was obsessed with mixing. I would track bands in the studio. My mindset while I was tracking was, I just want to get these guys out as soon as possible so that I can be alone to fiddle and mess with things and, reamp and do crazy EQ and edit and fix and all that stuff. Right. And my mixes never sounded that good. And, through some conversations and just observing and talking to other some real pros who are making records I loved, I just realized, like, man, that's not what it's about. It's about getting it right in the tracking stage. And that really, like, a pro mix is, you've got to have things played tightly. You got to have things in tune. Like I can't tell you how many mixes I reviewed for students or members of my courses, and the mix is fine, or at least it's not the main problem. Like, half the time my feedback to people is, hey, listen, like, the drums are like out of time here. Like, they need to track better, or you need to edit them. Your guitars are out of tune here. I can hear the left and right guitars flaming with each other. Your performance is sloppy. The vocals out of tune or out of time. Like, all these things, the mixing is not the problem in the majority of mixes that I review. So that was kind of the big light bulb for me. And that's kind of where I started kind of getting better opportunities as a producer and mixer, is when I figured that out. And I started spending a lot more time tracking properly, getting things really tight, in tune, great performances. Then my mixes just automatically got a lot better. And things started just going better for me in my career as well. So I think that's definitely the most important part.
Okay, cool. Well, let's pivot on that a little bit. You talked about getting guitars in tune, for example. Are there any tricks or tips you want to share about making sure your guitars and basses are in tune when you're going through the production process? How do we accidentally put a lot of work into something only to come back later and go and get kind of bit in the ass by the fact that something's out of tune?
I mean, I think to come back later and realize it's out of tune, I think it's just lack of attention during the tracking process. I think that it can also be a little bit of laziness, frankly. I think a lot of times we can maybe be in a long tracking session where it's taking a long time, or they're not playing their part well, and so it's taking forever. And so we can kind of get lazy and think, oh, I'll try to fix it later. I'll edit it later. There's got to be some way I can change that, or I'll try to comp it together later, and you just let things slide. And that's the worst thing you can do. So that's like number one thing, is just really paying attention and not settling for something that is not right. Like, regardless if you hope you can fix it later, like it'll be so much better to just get it right, or get it as good as you can, at least, while you're there tracking it. In terms of like kind of little tactical tips for tuning as you're tracking, one big thing, especially if you're doing rock, metal, hardcore stuff, but this will work in any genre, is to actually track the guitars before the bass. Right. And I started doing that a long time ago, and it really helped, because the guitars are just way harder. Like, you got 6 strings potentially that they're playing at the same time, right? So the way I look at it is, it's a lot easier to, let's say on the bass, let's say the classic problem with Fender basses, the seventh fret is like sharp, right, on the bass. And if you're just tracking the bass to the drums, you won't really notice that. But if you track the guitars first and then you're tracking the bass and that seventh fret is sharp, well, you can just tune the string to that seventh fret so that it's on, and then just punch in all of those notes and then fix that easily on the bass. Compare that to if you had tracked all the bass without doing that. So half of these notes are sharp. Now you've got to tune the guitar specially for all of those chords, for all those strings. You know what I mean? It's way harder to fix it that way. So I found that tracking the guitar first, and obviously just tuning all the time, tuning pretty much every take or every 2 takes is what I would do. And those are a few tips. The coolest thing to come along recently, I think, is the Evertune bridges.
Right. So A.L. Levy's been on the show too, and he brought those up, and he also had mentioned the bass after guitars. So I really dig hearing you talk about that. Clearly, that's one of the solutions that's really helpful when you're doing heavy music, where there's layers of all this distortion too that needs to. If it sounds out of tune, it sounds really bad.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think I've noticed that too. Like with the heavier genres with a lot of distortion, the tuning problems do become more apparent, I find. With the softer genres that I've done, or more just mellow rock, I've found there's a little more wiggle room with it.
Right.
But yeah, the Evertune bridges, I've tracked on them a little bit, and it's like, man, I wish those things existed like 10 years ago when I was tracking guitar every day for 10 hours a day. That probably would have saved me literally an hour or two every single day, multiplied by a few years. That would have been huge.
So let me ask you this. The Evertune bridge, do you think that that's something that the rock stars might check out, even if they're sort of more into indie rock or more into country or anything? Is it kind of a universally helpful tool that's worth taking a look at?
I would think so. I mean, the analogy I use is like, and when you sit down at a piano, you want it to sound in tune everywhere, right? Like you don't want to have to somehow bend the piano string to make it sound good or whatever.
Unless
Like
you're
you
doing
just
like a bar room piano, something
right.
like an old movie.
Yeah. So I think, I know there's some downsides to the Evertune bridge when it comes to, let's say, like soloing or some lead guitar stuff where you want some more vibrato or being able to bend the strings. So I think for any genre, like I would just use the Evertune guitars to track just rhythm guitars, where you're just playing chords, get the foundation guitar parts. And then, you can adjust it or just grab another guitar without the Evertune to do the lead stuff. I think that would be the ideal setup.
Because with the Evertune, if you were to bend a note, it would compensate and unbend the note while you're bending it, right?
Stays the same. Yeah.
Wow.
And so that makes it, again, way easier if you're tracking. Like, again, if I was tracking bands a lot right now, I would buy one of those guitars and just have it in the studio, and I would make all the bands use it to track their rhythm guitars.
Hold on. Can I do an interview and hit Amazon at the same time? That's my question.
Yeah.
No, that's cool, man. I'm going to check those out too. And then, but bands do come in and they don't have Evertunes. They've got the guitars they've been playing with. Anything you want to say about intonation? I've learned that lesson that even just taking time out at a session going, hold on, guys, let me spend a minute with your guitars and check the intonation can make a huge difference in a tracking session.
Yeah, I do that too. I mean, starting with making sure they have the right strings for their tuning, especially in the heavier genres. A lot of guys come in they want to tune low, like drop C or even lower for these other genres. And they're using like, the slinky strings or whatever. It doesn't work. So we got to get the right strings on there, heavier strings preferably. And then, I would do the same thing, man. I always grab their guitar and intonate it first before we track. And anytime we replace the strings, which is usually once a day, if we're doing a full day of guitar tracking, every time we put new strings on, I check the intonation again. That helps a ton. Just helps kind of take away some headaches and nightmares as you're tracking.
Yeah. And then, same thing with bass too. Just like you said before, it's like, don't forget to do the bass because as you pointed out, as engineers, we'll get focused on the bass tone and we're like, it sounds so good. That's great. Oh, we nailed it. And then you forget that, or just don't even notice that, every time he goes up to the 4th fret or the 5th or 6th or whatever, it's you didn't realize that if you look at it on a tuner, that note is actually not really in tune.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's always the first step for me too. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And that's also why, like, inside my courses, the tracking portion of my training, I spend a whole bunch of time like showing people, here's how to replace strings on a guitar, here's how to intonate a guitar and a bass. Because I think that engineers need to know that these days. Because most of the clients you work with, I found that even in like bands who are touring and they're in a band full time and they come in and they don't know how to intonate their guitars, So
Yeah.
or tune their drums. So I think engineers have to know that, and I try to always make sure to teach that stuff.
Very cool. And then one last comment I'll make on the tuning stuff too, Rockstars, is if you can ever get a hold of a real analog or even a digital strobe tuner, it's so worth it. Like I've got an old Peterson strobe tuner, and there's something, they're instantaneous. You can really see when a note is sharp or flat. They're a little bit of a pain in the butt to use. They're not as quick for just tuning a full guitar, but for checking notes or just before you do power chords, it can really be helpful.
Yeah, I used to have one of those Peterson pedals, and then I got like the Peterson plugin to use as a tuner. So yeah.
Does that work pretty great? Is that a great substitute?
It was, yeah. It's been a number of years since I used it because it was only in VST, so I had to use like a VST wrapper and stuff to like get it to work in Pro Tools. But I did use it for many years. Lately, I like to go with any tuner plugin that shows the sense too, and not just like not only the visual display, but I want to say like, -3 cents or +4 cents or whatever. I want to hit on that 0.
Right. Yeah. All right. So you mentioned drum tuning. Do anything you want to throw in there about tips for drum tuning before a session?
Yeah. Again, I think engineers should know how to do a really basic drum tuning. And it's not that hard. Again, I teach this in my courses, but I just have some really simple rules. Like, for example, for toms, I really pretty much always want a tom sound that is kind of fat and punchy, that has lots of attack and a good low end, but doesn't really sustain very long. Like I just kind of want that attack and that hit, right? So if you want that, basically the formula is the top head should be tuned pretty loose, almost as loose as you can get it. And then the bottom head should be tuned higher. So usually what I do is just take off the top head, flip it over, the bottom head, make sure it's in tune at all the lugs, just kind of tap at each lug, try to roughly get it so it's equal pitch all the way around. And in terms of how high to tune that bottom head, just hit it and see if it's kind of singing, like the tone will just kind of sing with that size of tom. And when you feel like it's really resonating nicely, then throw on the top head again and just tune it really loose on the top and you'll get a nice fat kind of smacky tom sound. So that's kind of like the go-to formula for me for toms.
Okay, and then cool. Is there anything about the pitch of that sustaining head? Is there just sort of do it by ear, or is there a way to, make sure it's in the key of the song, or is that getting a little too geeky with it?
Yeah, I've never tried to match the key of the song. I just try to make the tom sound good. That's it.
Okay.
And again, I'm usually not going for any that much sustain. I'm just kind of want more of a fat punch.
Anything we need to know about the style of drum heads? Do you like the clear coats or with the oils or any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I'm not too much of a nerd about it. I like the clear tom heads for sure. I just find they're a little bit just brighter, get more of a bright smack out of them. So I like the clear heads for toms. I like the coated heads for snares, of course. And the Remo has one that's like the dot in the middle, the controlled sound, I think it's called. I really like those for snares.
The Spectra 1964 Custom Shop now offers the STX100D, the big brother to the now famous STX100, a fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers. The STX100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Ardent, Advision, A&M, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 lunchbox. And if you want to to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 comp limiter, then check out the new STX 600 modules, combining the STX 100 mic pre and C610 in a single 500 module. That's how you're hearing my voice. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's, BBDI, and comp limiters. Go to spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. Whether you're in the studio or working remotely, the Envoy Pro FX from OWC lets you record from anywhere with confidence. It pushes USB technology bandwidth to the max of 2,800 megabytes per second over Thunderbolt, giving you high-speed audio data and recording and playback. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for the road, the OWC Envoy Pro FX is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Creativity without limits, only from OWC. Imagine never having to worry about your external drive interface again or compatibility from studio to studio. Find the new Envoy Pro FX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. iZotope is a secret weapon for your studio that can help you get consistently pro-sounding mixes. And now you can get access to all their plugins through the new subscription options. Only $24.99 per month, Music Production Suite Pro is designed for the serious recording, mixing, and mastering engineer, putting the finishing touches on music, film, and podcasts with fully pro versions of Ozone, RX, Neutron, Nectar, Neoverb, Tonal Balance Control, Visual Mixer, and much more, including free plugin updates. Or for only $19.99 per month, you can join Producers Club to get a suite of industry-leading production, mixing, and mastering plugins, custom presets, royalty-free samples, production courses, and more. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscriptions or Spire Studio. I know another challenge in mixing drums is dealing with cymbals. Do you have anything that we should be thinking about on the recording side of the equation to make sure we aren't digging ourselves a hole we can't get out of when it comes time to mix?
Yeah, back to just getting it right at the source. I would say make sure you're using the right cymbals for the job. I think a lot of bands, a lot of drummers, especially younger ones, they'll come in with cymbals that are just really big and really washy because they sound loud and powerful live, right? But again, depending on the genre, you should try to be using cymbals that match what you're going for. So on a really technical metal record, I don't really want them to have huge, like big 20-inch crashes, because they're going to be really washy. They're going to be really loud. They're not going to be as defined. You're not going to be able to hear all the technicalities of all the hits. So we'll go for smaller crashes in that scenario. Generally in the studio, I like having smaller crashes that you can just control the sound more, but I'm definitely open to kind of working with the drummer to see what's comfortable for them too. But
so you mentioned, I think, did you just say 20 would be maybe a size, off the top of your head, that's one you would describe as a bigger, washier one? What is a smaller one? Like 16 or 17 or something like that?
Yeah, I think like having like a 16 and an 18 for your crashes, like on a rock band, it would be good. And they, with like an 18, I think you could, have those rock sections where you're really like just like riding on the cymbal on the crash and playing the kit. That would you'd still be able to hear like the drummer hitting that crash each time. You know what I mean? Versus just being like a total.
Right. So.
Yes. Yeah.
And then Rockstars, just for clarity's sake, we're not talking about the Ringo Starr like. That's a different style, different genre. Okay, cool. So drums, great. One of the things that it seems pretty consistent in Rockstars, again, I've got a great playlist of music from Jordan in the show notes. So make sure you go click on that and you'll really hear examples of the kinds of records we're talking about, how great these mixes sound. But there's a consistency to an appropriate style of kick drum, a kick drum that really has a point, that can be quick, that you could do fast kick stuff that might be appropriate for the style of music. Talk a little bit about that. Talk about, the times where maybe the band comes in and they're just not thinking straight about where this kick's supposed to end up to sound right in the mix.
Yeah. So on the tracking stage and tuning the kick drum, again, you don't want to have a really big, huge kick drum. It's just pushes a lot too much air. It's even harder to play for these guys too. But you want to have like a tight, smaller, controlled kick drum. In terms of tuning, if you want that pokiness, like that bite and attack, like you mentioned,
Yeah.
I found that tuning both of the drum heads really loose. So I mean, that's a common theme. I said the same thing with the toms, but the beater head for the kick drum, loosen it off. Like I would just tighten it with my fingers, like as tight as I could get with my fingers, and maybe just a little bit of the tuning key. You want to have it really loose, and that gives you that kind of plasticky smack for that
And
top end.
that's the beater side.
That's the beater side, yeah. And then on the resonance side, often the same thing, like really loose, because then you just get that low end thump, and you don't really get any like long sustain of the kick drum, And maybe you want to throw in like a pillow or blanket, classic stuff inside the kick drum to kind of keep it dead and tight. But that's generally what I would do, and I would just mic it with one mic with a D112, like kind of inside in the middle of the kick drum, pointing at the beater head.
Okay, cool. And again,
Yep.
we're talking about parts. We're not talking about a pop song necessarily that's going like boom, boom, boom.
Right.
We're talking about something that's like I don't think I can sing it.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to make that sound. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, that makes sense. And again, it's great to be reminded of when you understand what your end goal is for a style of music, it makes it a lot easier to make the right decisions at the get-go so that you aren't creating problems for yourself down the line. Now, what about triggers? How important is it for us to understand using triggers on drums? Is that something that's valuable? Is that something to stay away from? What are your thoughts there?
Well, do you mean like a physical trigger, like on the drum?
Tell us both. Tell us whether that's something to think about or whether we're talking about using like Slate trigger as a plug-in in the mixing stage.
Yeah. So I never record or bother with putting drum triggers on the drums, because as long as you're capturing the audio from the mic, you can use, like you said, the Slate trigger plugin to trigger and augment and replace. So yeah, I'd say in rock and really a lot of genres of music these days, but especially the heavier stuff, it's pretty commonplace that probably 90, 95, maybe more % of the mixes you're hearing, there's at least samples mixed in to the kick and snare, and sometimes completely replaced. But yeah, it's a useful and really important tool, I'd say.
Okay, cool. And if Rockstars, if you're not familiar with it, Slate Trigger is a really amazing plugin. You could just put it right on the drum track. It does what we would have considered magic back in the 1990s, because it took a lot longer to, place individual drum samples by hand in a mix so that they all sounded right. Now it's a plugin that just will replace it for you, and it's in time and in phase,
Yeah.
So very cool. All right. So let's see. Anything else you want to comment about recording drums in a home studio setting? You talked about making sure the room is dead. Deader is better. Again, if we're not trying to do a big boomy kick, then even that gets easier in a home studio setting where deader is better, because you're just really trying to get the quick, short punch out of it.
Yep.
What about the ways that you mic the cymbals and the overheads? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's definitely a good area to bring up. Personally, when I think of overheads and I'm miking the overheads and the cymbals, I'm thinking of them as like cymbal mics. So I'm not really trying to capture the kit as a whole in those overhead mics. I'm trying to capture the cymbals. I want to hear the individual hits. I want definition. I want control of the cymbals in the mix. And as much as possible, I want to be able to, move that overhead fader up and down and have it mostly be changing the cymbal sound, right? Not the whole kit. So that's my goal. So it's a little hard to explain just by talking here, but I'll try to, point the mics kind of at the cymbals towards the outside edge of the cymbals so that they're almost like pointing a little bit away from the drum, if that makes sense.
So but they're above the drums looking down, but sort of looking forward also or something?
They're kind of looking like, so if you're looking at the drum kit, so if you're not from a drummer's perspective, but if you're standing in front of a drum kit, looking
Mhm.
at it,
Mhm.
and you got your cymbals on the left and right. So the overhead mics are going to be pointing towards the edge of the cymbal that is like close to you. Does that make sense?
Right. Right.
Rather than the edge that's closest to the drums.
Right. They're almost pointing toward you a little bit.
Yeah, look kind of angled a little bit, kind of towards the edge of the cymbal, maybe towards you, and therefore a little bit away from the drummer.
Right. Right. So if you hit a drum, a tom or a snare drum, the mic's not pointed directly towards that tom and snare drum. It's sort of looking away from it a little bit.
Exactly, yeah. And I will try to. I learned this from watching John Fields. What I'll do is I'll use a tape measure to check the distance from the snare to each overhead mic
Mhm.
and make sure that's equal, so that at least the snare is centered.
Mhm.
And then as long as that snare is centered between those two mics, I'm just trying to capture the overheads as isolated as possible. Obviously, you're going to get tons of kit bleed, but isolate them as much as you can. And yeah, that's kind of my strategy there.
Okay. Any thoughts on what kind of mics make good overhead mics? I mean, should we be getting large diaphragm condensers, small diaphragm condensers, dynamics, ribbons?
Yeah, for what I'm talking about, I mean, obviously you can use all those, but for what I'm talking about, definitely small diaphragm condensers, just more directional, just be more focused on where they're pointing and just pick up more detail there. I've used large diaphragms before, but I just find I just get too much of a kind of broad picture of the kit, which
Right.
might be
Right.
good in some cases, but for what I'm working on most of the time, that's not what I'm usually going for.
Right. So if we want to do a broad picture of the whole kit, like a Glyn Johns technique kind of thing, then yeah, the
Yeah,
large diaphragm. But when we do want to get that feeling that really mostly what we're hearing is the brightness of the cymbals, then
yeah,
these small diaphragms would be great. And then
yeah.
maybe we're geeking too much, but any thoughts on sort of a hypercardioid versus a cardioid capsule on those small diaphragms?
I've never actually experimented with that. Always just regular cardioid. I love. I mean, there's so many small diaphragms that I've been happy with, but
Hmm.
my favorite were the AKG 451s.
Right.
I find that like I never boosted or cut top end on those. It was just exactly as they were captured. Sounded great in the mix.
Yeah. And I've got a pair of those and they do have a brightness quality to them. So that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. Okay, cool. How about getting low end and the bass right with this stuff? What do we want to know about both I mean, you talked about that with the headphones, so we've got that aspect of it. But what else is there that we might want to know about the mixing side of it, and then anything about the tracking recording side where we can screw up our bass and our low end?
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to tracking, it's kind of the same things we've talked about before, and just taking your time, paying attention, making sure it's in tune, making sure it's tight, all that stuff. But bass, for mixing, getting the low end right, it's obviously a challenge for a lot of people, and it was for me for a long time too. Um, what I like to do is kind of my main trick is using a multi-band compressor, let's say like the C4, the C6 from Waves.
Mhm.
And I like to just bypass all of the bands except for the lowest one. So it's just working on like the frequencies below 100.
Mhm.
And I'll just compress that by itself, that range, and then just use the gain control on that to just turn up or down the amount of sub. So you're kind of just compressing those sub frequencies independently and then using that almost as like a fader for the sub frequencies. And in terms of getting it right, it's just referencing. Like again, like I said, I'll throw on my headphones, I'll listen to my mix, I'll throw on some of my reference tracks and just kind of compare to make sure I have enough of that low end sub rumble.
So a couple of things. Let's back up a little bit and talk about what kind of bass are we
Yeah.
talking about here. So when we're recording the bass, how often do you find it useful to have a mic on an amp, or is it more we're taking a direct sound on the bass and we're sort of creating the amp sound as part of the mix process?
Yeah, usually just direct. I've definitely had occasional good results from miking up a bass cab. Pretty sure pretty much every time I've been happy with the bass amp sound, it's been like an old Ampeg SVT, and that's kind of the only ones that sound good to me.
Right.
Or maybe it's my fault. I don't know. Maybe I can't. Maybe I'm just not good at miking up bass amp. I don't know. But typically, I get better results from just taking a DI and using something like a Sans amp for the bulk of the tone. And
While you're
usually
recording
that's
it, or is that something that happens
while I'm
later?
recording it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll like to take either a Sans amp rack or a Sans amp pedal alongside the clean DI And usually those two in the mix is a good starting point. And then by the time I actually go to the mixing stage, I might also kind of duplicate the DI track and put like a more aggressive distortion on that and blend that in subtly or a lot, depending on the song. But that's generally, I'm totally happy with that. Like I could care less if I have a bass amp to mic up. I'm totally happy just using those direct tools.
Okay, cool. It would be hard to describe in one sentence what gives records a legendary sound, but it would be easy to describe in 3 letters: API. For more than 50 years, API Audio has created large format consoles for world-class studios. Famous for co-founder Saul Walker's circuit designs and the original 2520 op amp, the sound of API consoles is the sound of great music. API now brings that legendary sound to your home studio with the Box, a small format console featuring the famous API circuitry that is the perfect analog addition to your digital studio. The Box gives you 8 recording channels on the left with built-in mic pre's, high-pass filters, direct inputs, and customizable 500 module slots, and 16 summing channels on the right. Or you can mix using all 24 channels, including aux sends, inserts, and silky smooth faders. API now offers a virtual console experience with a personalized online demo of the Box, 16082 or 2448 consoles. Sign up for your demo now at apiaudio.com. Making sure your vocal sounds amazing in your mix starts with capturing your voice perfectly. This means controlling sibilants and plosives at the mic. Back when I started out, we used to make pop filters out of pantyhose and a wire hanger, but not only did it not look good or smell great, but it also didn't sound all that great either. There's a reason that the Beastie Boys said they never rocked the mic with the pantyhose. Fortunately, pop filters have come a long way in the studio, and JZ Mics brings you the ultimate pop filter, built from solid metal parts that won't break and a flexible gooseneck for easy placement. The JZ Pop Filter uses a unique waveguide design that prevents plosives from getting through to the mic while letting important high frequencies through for clarity. Get your vocals just right and use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. Now, you mentioned the DI, so we might as well at least give a shout out to the power of the DI for guitars and amps. I think when you're doing heavy music, do you find it useful to have a DI as part of the recording process because you can make tighter and more accurate edits on guitars and basses and actually reamp so that you know, it's like you're editing the DI and then you're re-recording the amp sound as part of the mix?
Yeah, I'm not, I don't edit the guitar and bass much after the fact. I'm spending all the time up front getting the takes like as perfect as I can.
Okay.
But like you said, it is a good visual tool, especially for distorted guitars, because that's just a block on the screen.
Yeah.
But if you record the DI with that, then yeah, you can really use that to either edit, maybe do some minor sliding things around, or make sure you're not covering up a strum or a pick or transient or something, or and just visually confirm what you're hearing. And yeah, I'm not much of a reamp guy, but yeah, I still always record a DI just for the visual aid.
Okay, cool. And then one of the things that I've seen you teach in your videos is, you know, unlike the Oculus Quest virtual reality game that we just got for Christmas, where, you know, the level starts and you have to make it from start to finish perfectly, or else you're booted back to the starting line. In production, you know, cheating is I can't think of a good rhyme word. Cheating is being cool. You know, you can, in other words, you can record, you can get portions of things right, and you can focus on just that one bar and punch in until just that one little riff is perfect, and then move on to the next section. You don't have